Welcome to the Payment Strategy Show. I'm Becky Kopplin, VP of Payments at Rainforest. We help software platforms embed processing to grow revenue and improve customer retention. I am incredibly pleased to be here today with Matthew Goldman. Matthew is a product and strategy consultant with deep expertise in payments and fintech. If you don't believe me, go check out his LinkedIn. I scrolled for a long time. Fantastic resume and experience, and I'm thrilled to have him joining us today. But thank you, Matthew, for being on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I want to start with maybe a little easier one. And I have a theory here, so I want to see if it's true, which is kind of like nobody intends to get into payments. We all ended up here on accident. So I'm going to test my theory live. How did you get into payments?
I might break your theory. I wanted to get into payments.
No, you're the
I
first.
I always thought that the way people pay for things was interesting. I don't really know why. Maybe just because my dad would be teaching me about kind of personal finance. And I did my first job out of college. I was like a strategy consultant at Deloitte, and I didn't really like that. And I was looking for something new. And I heard about this small startup called Green Dot, and I got super excited because it was a payments company. And I've been looking, how do I get into this? I didn't really want to work at a bank. That sounded boring, but there was something else. Maybe I didn't really know fully what payments meant, but I applied for a job as a product manager there. This was like 2005 when I applied. And it was like extremely early days. We didn't even call it fintech then, but I really want to understand, how does the money move? How does this actually work? We all swipe cards all the time, but no one really knows how that stuff happens. So dove in from there and have basically been in payments ever since.
I love it. I love it. And like I said, you're the first person. You've maybe the exception that makes the rule, I'm going to go with. So I'm going to keep my rule standing until I find
There you
another one.
go.
But I love that early interest. So tell me how that path led you to where you're at now at Totavi, where you are doing a lot of strategy and consulting with firms looking to get into fintech.
Yeah, payments are so complicated and every part of them is so niche. Like, I'm a cards person first and foremost. If you want to talk about some other kind of, I don't know, international payments, I'm probably not your guy, right? They're all kind of different problems. But I started Green Dot, which was, at the time, we would think of it as a neobank now. We're building prepaid cards for consumers. We were digitizing cash and letting people who were primarily in the cash economy to spend money online. I took a kind of brief little detour. This is my one segment out of payments, working at a unit of AT&T that did advertising locally, but we worked with small businesses and we did like couponing. And at the time, AT&T was launching their first mobile payments joint venture. And so I worked a little bit with that team, and I've always been very entrepreneurial. So I decided that was my time to go start a company. And I started Wallaby, which was a payments optimization app for consumers. Spent some time doing that and sold it to Bankrate, where I was head of product. Then wanted to start another company. I started a credit card, kind of go back to the issuing side. And I sold that company to a fintech infrastructure BaaS company called Apto. And the inspiration for Totavi came from that part of the experience because, like many, companies in the space who are providing fintech infrastructure, like, you're like, here's our API. And so we'd have all these startups come, and our mission at Apto was to make it really easy to issue a card. And then people would sign up and they would start playing with the API, and they'd be like, we need to decide how to build our product and what should this look like and that. And they would ask all these questions. We were like, well, we're not a consulting firm. We're an API platform, and we don't have those people, right? Like, venture capitalists
Right.
don't want to fund consulting businesses typically because it
Sure.
doesn't have the kind of scaling aspect. But I felt like a lot of these folks were struggling, and I was present there, and I had sales and product and a bunch of functions. And I especially saw on the sales side, I would talk to these prospects and they would say, well, so and so told me such and such at this other company. I'd be like, well, that's just not possible. Or they'd be like,
Right.
such and such says this is free. And I'm like, well, I don't know how they make it free because that costs us a bunch of money. Like, we're just paying Visa for that, or whatever. And they couldn't fully trust me because I was like selling them something, but I felt they needed an independent person to help them. And so I was like, maybe this is my next chapter, is to sit outside some of those providers and be able to come in as the fintech expert when companies are looking for that, help them navigate provider selection, help them navigate what that product should first look like. And then when it's successful, we can go on our way and they can hire a product manager to run it on an ongoing basis. But there's just so much to learn. And if you're the CEO of a vertical SaaS company, you're never going to get there in 6 months. It just
Right.
takes way too long.
Both you and I have been in the industry, 20 plus years now, and I still feel like I'm learning stuff every day. I can't
Absolutely.
imagine trying to spend some part-time element of my job and get up to speed enough to make some big decisions. I know when I was doing consulting, it felt like there was a wave of investor community that would run into software platforms and say, you should be a PayFac and you're going to make 100 basis points. It was like this mantra. And so it really was kind of educating the community on what it really meant to do embedded payments well as a software company. I'm assuming you've run into a lot of those similar kind of misconceptions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it goes really rapidly from we didn't think about it at all to someone told us we can make a huge amount of money doing this. Or
Yeah,
like, I heard that such and such company makes 30% of the revenue from payments. And I'm like, there's a lot between here and there. What risk do you want to take on? Are you comfortable dealing with that? How many operational people? There's so many different paths. And we do a lot of card issuance work. And so it's like, oh, we want to embed a purchasing card into our vertical SaaS platform. Like, okay, well, there's totally turnkey things and like they're not customizable, but you don't have to worry about it. And there's build the whole thing from scratch and build the purchasing card of your dreams for plumbers or whatever. Those are very far apart and it's very hard for a company to decide where they should go. And there's different margins, but again, like you have to invest to get those margins, right? And I think that's true to your point about PayFacs as well. Like you could go all the way to the core and build everything yourself and capture some margin, but you're going to spend several $1,000,000 doing it first. And maybe you don't want to do that.
right, right. Yeah, what other, I mean, I feel like we've seen a lot of trends come and go. What's the most notable ones for you, especially like last couple of years? What are the trends that you're seeing kind of folks grab onto?
Yeah, I think certainly there's still this huge wave of we're going to help you accept payments. I know in the industry we starting to feel like that's been going on for a long time now, but I still think there's so many businesses that aren't, and there's so many that need to build that in, and it's everything from cards to APAR, invoice payments, but even we'll pick on the big classic of QuickBooks or whatever. They've been investing aggressively into helping people accept payments directly in their application, which wasn't true
Hmm.
even a couple of years ago. So I think that's a really big one. And the other part is lending. I think there's a lot more opportunities for businesses to embed lending into their experience. It used to be very, very separate. We have customers, and if they don't have money, they need to go find money. And now you see a lot of these solutions, right, where you send your customer an invoice, or maybe you're making a bill payment, and it's like, we can help you pay by card, we can help you pay by ACH, or we can offer you a term loan. And we have all your data because we're already all integrated. Really powerful.
Yeah, I totally agree. When folks are thinking about whether it's accepting payments or APAR or lending, especially if you're thinking about that from the lens of a software platform, what's the most critical decisions? If you got a CEO listening to this right now, what would you tell them are the most critical decisions they have to get right from day one when they're thinking about embedding these kinds of services?
I think where folks need to start with, much like any other product work, is what is the problem you're solving and why are you the right person to solve it? Because if, for example, you're a vertical SaaS that doesn't deal with, I don't know, invoicing, you do something else, it's very hard to add invoicing into that. What's your right to win that part of the business? If, on the other hand, you're like a invoice generation, quoting, bid management platform, then it's really easy to do that, right? Like it's a
Yeah.
very natural extension. So first, where do you sit on that? And is it core to the product? The other thing, which is kind of counterintuitive, why would you do this if you just didn't make any money on it? Let's say it's like flat neutral. You're not losing money on it. You're not giving away a product, but you're not really making money. What are the reasons you do this? And this comes from actually on the consumer side, when brands like Macy's or Target or whatever do credit cards, we often say there's 6 reasons to do a card, and profitability is number 6, right? Like you do it because you want loyalty and data and engagement and repeat spend and reduce churn and all these other things. And I think the same thing applies in the B2B world. If I'm going to offer you lending or card acceptance, I'm doing it because it makes my user's life easier and better. Now, if I do that right, like in the end, I should make money, but just saying, oh, I'm going to embed payments because I can make a bunch of money, I think that usually leads you down a path where you actually don't get the adoption.
That's really interesting. I feel like most folks that I'm talking to, most platforms are seriously considering payments because, and revenue's not number 6 or 7 on the list, like revenue's number 1 on the list, right? And then we kind of back into product value. Or when you sit with a client and you share this, hey, that should not be top on the list, do they generally seem surprised? I feel like that was a new look for me. And I love it, by the way, but I'm wondering how novel that feels to you as well.
Yeah, I think it depends on the customer base so much of theirs. Like really high volume businesses get this because we usually start talking about reconciliation first. Like the reason this is valuable is real time automated reconciliation. There's a lot of businesses where there's somebody who spends a lot of time,
Yeah.
figuring out which invoice was paid. And those businesses and those business owners are easily sold on, I can free up that person to do higher value work. Right. And then you have a reason to be like, work with us and pay us, whatever, 2% or whatever, because now, like Joe in accounting can go do something else, right? Which is very valuable. But I also think that when the end customer tends to be more like consumers. So this is where let's talk about plumbers. Everyone loves using plumbers as the example, right? There's plumbers who come to your house and there's plumbers who go to like skyscrapers.
Right.
And those plumbers are very different plumbers and very different companies. And so the skyscraper companies might have, 150 plumbers and they're these big operations and they have someone accounting. The guy who comes to your house might be like, his wife does it part time, or he does it part time, or his cousin does it because his cousin's an accountant. And so then it's much more, you can probably say, well, they're already accepting credit cards, so why don't we accept credit cards for them? And it's a much simpler kind of sales line and easier pitch.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. As you're thinking about, as companies and buyers of fintech and payments are thinking about the selection process, the RFP, I know you do a lot of these. What do they miss when they do these on their own that like folks like you and others like you solve for them and help point out?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that stand out. One is I think when folks do that themselves, they miss all the most interesting providers. They're kind of like, well, I read an article and they pick one of the two biggest names they heard about, or whoever was in TechCrunch most recently, or whoever their board member sent to them. And they don't realize how many players there are. And so they make bad assumptions about what the pricing should look like or what the service should look like. Because to be frank, right, like a lot of the largest companies have the worst service, or you need to prove more revenue before you're able to get access to people. And I think some of the more focused companies like will be more helpful in the sales process. So that's one. I think the other is that they don't think about the whole universe of services. So if they come and they say, well, I'm looking for a PayFac because I want to accept credit cards, they might not ask enough questions about ACH and RTP and FedNow and like other things, or maybe lending, like we talked about. Whereas if they go and they say, hey, we want to do a PAR. Okay, let's talk about all the things that can mean. Do your customers do FX? Should we talk about FX? Like maybe your customers do that stuff and that would be interesting, or maybe they don't. And so there's so many aspects of payments that come into it. And I think they make a point solution decision when sometimes you actually need to be making a much bigger one.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like what we've seen as well is people really don't value support and partnership as much as they really need to. As much as you can get,
Yeah.
you check the box with technology, maybe you really did think to ask all of the RTP, FedNow kind of questions, and then, go to bring up your partner at the end of the day and nobody answers the phone. And I think people really misunderstand how important that is to have somebody on the other end that can help you. Is that something you include as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also a privileged spot of consultants. I know consultants we get a bad rap sometimes, but we add values. We actually have worked with some of these companies and done implementations, and so you can actually weigh in a little bit on what that experience is. So, a company like Rainforest that's more focused, right? I think you guys have great support. Whereas some of these companies where it's like, oh, we have 5,000 people and we're part of this giant company. The reality is you get on the phone and even if someone is there, they never have the answer. They're like, oh, I got to go call someone else and find the answer, right? And so
Right.
I think that there's this deep dive you have to do into, like you said, like what does implementation really look like? What does support really look like? Because if you just make that decision purely based on, oh well, I'm saving 1 basis point by picking this provider, that's probably not going to work for you.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the follow-up that I normally make to that is volume beats margin. And so if you got at a basis point, but you can't sell it, or you can't get adoption because you didn't think through holistically, I think that goes back to your earlier point about value, right? Revenue being last on that list. Like volume always beats margin. And if you can't get volume, it didn't matter that you saved that basis point in that contract or not.
Payments is also a funny thing in general, especially like card payments in specific, because we don't all control the pricing, right? Like the networks fundamentally control the pricing. So there is a
Right,
floor, right? There's always a floor. Like it's not like someone's going to show up and be like, well, we only charge 40 basis points. That's
right.
like not going to
Not gonna
happen because you
happen.
got to pay the card stuff. And so, and that goes back to on the customer side, the right to win. You're not going to win payments volume because the user, let's just say the user is like, they're on Stripe and they're like, well, I pay $2.95 plus 30 cents. And you're like, well, I'm going to charge you $2.89. They're like, okay, I'm not switching for 6 basis points, right? Like
Right.
you have to have that value where they're like, oh, my business is actually going to be easier to run by using your service and by having the integration. And so, especially for like the embedded finance play, it has to be stop doing the thing you're doing today and start doing this thing with me. And that switching cost is worth it because your business has improved. And yeah, also, it should be maybe a better deal. That would be nice. It can't be a
Right.
worse deal. But I don't think those business owners are deciding based on that because they're thinking about all these other touch points, right? I mean, I had a business that like we were doing, this is just a funny story. Like we were doing all the customer discovery as we were doing the initial product strategy for an APAR solution. And this woman was like, well, we like to take checks. And I was like, tell me more. And she's like, well, we send our salesperson to our customer and we pick up the check and then they remember who we are and they give
Oh,
us more business. And I was like, well, see, like,
interesting.
interesting. And so like my problem with them wasn't they don't want to pay 295 or 267 or whatever. The problem was, will they accept credit cards because they like to get checks, which is just blows your mind. But it's like different kinds of businesses do different kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
And they wanted that touch point because they're in a very commoditized space where their pricing was very sensitive. And so you had to think about, and again, the pitch there was ultimately like, well, we can help you reconcile and get paid faster. You're like, cash flow is important. We'll buy that one, right? Like
Right.
it had nothing to do with rates really or anything else.
Yeah, no, I found that to be true so often. I want to come back to something you were talking about. You were talking about being in the weeds on these implementations, right? And having that give you some insight. But when you're doing kind of some of these operational implementations and things with clients, like what are some of the unexpected operational challenges that come up for embedded payments, right? Whether that's implementation process, where it's going to be where that starts, or later on down the road. And maybe how can software companies proactively kind of think about what some of these challenges might be?
I think what gets lost most in implementation is the support aspect, both with your payments provider and with your customer. Because you're kind of like, well, we're going to embed a credit card form on this checkout page or whatever. And I'm like, okay, but who are they going to call when that doesn't work, right? Like, especially this isn't buying a t-shirt, probably, right? This company's probably paying your company like thousands of dollars a year or a month to operate this platform. They're going to want to pick up the phone and say, hey, my customer had payment problems.
Yep.
And so it becomes a real challenge to think through that. And they're very focused on the technical implementation. It tends to be like a lot of engineers and product people. And what you really need more of is customer success and support engaging on the implementation and understanding those flows so that if a card's rejected or a check bounce, not a check, an ACH bounces or something, there's these problems like what is going to happen and how are you going to make your customer happy and their end customer happy? Because one of those super critical moments is payments go well, right? Like payments are one of
Yeah.
those classic, like they should always work, but they're super complicated. So you can imagine if I'm, a B2B provider and I charge my customer $10,000 and my software platform screws that up. And then the end customer is, well, I don't want to work with you anymore because you can't take payments. That's just terrifying, right? That's going to cause some
Right.
serious churn. So I think that part of the implementation gets lost because it ends up just being a bunch of like engineers being like, well, I'm sending you this call on the API, but that's not really where the risk is. Like you can figure that out. The risk is in the handoffs.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's totally right. And you're thinking about kind of the stickiness of that experience. And if you think about it holistically, then, and that value to the end user or to the merchant in a B2B scenario, how do embedded solutions really enhance that, right? Whether that's engagement, whether you talked about getting in front of people or retention or overall platform stickiness, like with embedded payments or fintech, like how do because you talked about how important that is, but talk more about the mechanics. Like, what does that really look like for embedded fintech?
I think so much of it depends on the ease of use and these incremental opportunities, right? If I just send you an invoice and at the bottom of the invoice it says, please send me an ACH and here's my routing number, that's now a task that I, as the customer, have to take on, right? And if instead I have that pay link and it's easy and you save my card number or you use like bank account login to grab data, I have reminders, I can schedule a payment, like it's all about how do I make this relationship easier and better, and then also the data around it on both sides, which I think people like, right? Like, One thing that I think is really interesting is a lot of embedded solutions are invoice based, right? It's
Yeah.
like, I sent you an invoice and here's a payment link. They're not customer based, which I think is a big opportunity for a lot of them, where it's like, I send you an invoice and here's a link, but when you click on it, I can see, oh, I have two open invoices, or here's my
Mm,
open invoice and I have five unpaid, like actually a portal for the customer to see some data about them. And you see this in like, like I'll use bill.com as the kind of classic example. If everyone's using that, you can see all this data. But even just on a one-to-one basis, if I'm building this, and that's real value for, again, like Joe's commercial plumbing service or whatever, they're like, oh, well, you can see all our bills. And so maybe if you're an accountant at that business, you're like, hey, did I pay that? You can actually go somewhere and see that. And you can actually make their life easier. And that really can drive that kind of, I like working with this company. They're easy to do. If I get a payment reminder, I know how to click a button, or I can schedule. I think scheduling is really underrated for everything, because people are like, oh, I don't want to pay that bill till it's due. And then they forget and then they pay late. And much usually be like, oh, I'm going to pay that in 12 days. I'm just going to do it right. But I'm going to do it now. Like,
yeah.
I don't know why that's missing. So I think there's a lot of these little like usage and product decisions that you can make that make, well, are payments ever delightful? Unclear for regular people. But like, you can at least make it a lot easier, because
Sure.
it's the thing that people like least want to do. And there's this, I think, the saying like in retail, which is like, the payment should disappear from the conversation. Like,
Yeah.
you don't want to talk to your customer about how, this is why I tell people, like, just accept American Express and Discover. Like, when people are like, oh, should I accept them? Do you want to be selling someone something and be like, oh, we don't take that?
Right.
What a terrible conversation to have. Like, just eat the 20 basis points or whatever, right? Who
Yeah.
cares? But it's like, you want to be talking about the commerce, which is the service or goods you're selling. The payments are the plumbing. You just want them to work and be unseen.
Yeah, yeah. I think the example I use up for that most often when I'm thinking about kind of both the right to win conversation we were having and that a great experience is Uber. Because I remember back in the day, like you'd take a taxi and you'd get to your location, have this really awkward exchange where you'd hand over your Amex and they
Yeah.
don't take that, and then wait for the print. And it was just this wild, awkward checkout experience in a car. And Uber's made that so you get out of the Uber and the payment now isn't, that wasn't even a thought, right? Like my card was already stored. There's no decision about when it runs, right? It disappears in the experience of taking a ride. And that always for me is kind of that gold standard.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of those classic examples, Uber is such a great one, especially for every business traveler everywhere. I'll never
Right.
forget the time I argued with a cab driver about how he didn't want to take my card. And I was like on a business trip. I'm like, you just have to. I specifically asked you when I got in your cab if you would take my card. And then I left my cell phone in the backseat and had to talk to him again later to get it back. That was very awkward and expensive for me.
Oh,
But,
jeez.
like, I think about this when I was just in New York. I was thinking about this. It's actually often faster and easier to hail a cab, and they do accept payments now, but it's still not as easy of an experience, right? And there's still
Right.
like terminals that don't work and stuff. And so when the taxi drivers are like, "Oh, Uber destroyed us," I'm like, "You were a very unfriendly provider. Like, you had this kind of monopoly, and you treated people crappy, and so no wonder." And it's the same thing with, stores that are cash only. I'm like, "You're just making my life difficult. Like, why?" Is this the hill you're dying on? Like,
Right.
is that really worth it to you? And I have, even in my business, I have like most of my clients B2B, and they send me a payment from their bill pay service, whatever. But I have this one guy, and he was like, I was trying different payment solutions because I can't help myself. And he's like, he just loves it. He's like, it's so easy. It takes me 5 seconds. I'm like, okay, now I can never stop using this payment service with this one client because I don't want to make his life hard. I send him the invoice link and he clicks pay and everyone's happy, right? So again, you just want that to go away. You don't want to be talking about, hey, can you pay me? You want to be talking about, what is the additional work we can do together?
Yeah, you just remove payments from the conversation. You think about those examples and they're all just super seamless. Nobody thought about the transaction. It just ran, money just moves. But I mean, and from a consumer or non-payments person perspective, like they're kind of unaware of all of the different steps and vendors. But really, one of the things that they're also pretty unaware of is like the risk and regulatory things that are happening behind the scenes, which is something we always have to think about because seamless and frictionless is really great when you don't have to think about risk and regulatory, right? That's where that starts to get complicated. Like, what kind of strategies can platforms think about with like how to think about seamless and also reducing risk or complying with regulatory requirements?
Yeah, that's an area where I think that development of payment facilitation has been so critical, because it used to be like you had to go grab card numbers and make sure you passed them. And I mean, it sounds like you and I both been this before since before PCI. What a wild west it used to be,
Isn't
right?
that crazy?
But
It
like
really
now
was.
you just don't want to touch any of that stuff, right? And so you don't have to. And a lot of like ink has been spilled on the internet about like Stripe checkout for consumers and all the time they spent in figuring out like the like little nuances, and that's great. And a lot of different payment providers have done that, right? Like I'm sure Square has spent a fortune figuring out exactly what that screen should look like and how it optimizes payments. It's like if you're a B2B SaaS, like you're never going to spend that time on that. It doesn't make sense. So the ability to just embed experiences, right? Like I'm really big on the SDK or hosted checkout pages over like pure APIs because that is so critical. And then you get these potential network effects with where it's like card numbers are stored or there's fraud prevention involved and there's always changing regulations, and so you want your payment partner or provider to be worrying about that, and you just don't want to worry about it because it's not your business. You're worried about whatever your real business is.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that's right. And it feels like the summary of that is outsource it, right? And I think for
Yeah,
most software platforms, they really aren't in the business of payment risk and compliance, right? They really are in the business of being a business
yeah.
management software platform for plumbers, for example.
Yeah, and that's where to pick on maybe the card issuance side for a moment again. Oh, people will be like, "Oh, I want my own version of, Ramp or Brex for my customers." I'm like, "Okay,
Sure.
well, do you have $10 million and 3 years to build that?" Or there are some people who are like, "Here's a fully hosted corporate purchasing card solution." Okay, go do that, right? Are you going to, and look, if that turns out to be a runaway success and you make hundreds of millions of dollars in it, okay, yes, then go spend the CapEx to insource functions
Yeah,
and capture margin. But when you're first starting, this is that kind of like MVP discussion. You don't know whether your customers are going to care about your corporate card. Do as little work as possible to learn the most amount of data and go from there because it's its own business, right? And
yeah.
and so it's so hard to think you're going to be an expert there.
Totally. And I think the guidance that I gave is two points. Don't lock yourself in with a contract, right? Own your data, make sure you've got a good out, and then test, measure, learn, right? Just fail fast, get something out there, learn
Yeah.
something about it, right? And that totally aligns with what you're saying as well. But I want to spend a little more time here thinking about your product background shows through, right? You're always thinking about what that user experience is like, and I love that. But when you bring all of those things together, payables, receivables, spend, right, and you're really single platform or single experience and connecting those things, how does that really unlock new revenue and deeper adoption, right? Kind of both of those things. If revenue is now maybe six, but 1 through 5 leads to that for them. How does that all interconnect and work together?
Yeah, I think it starts with the wedge of what is the most important part of the whole structure. Like we talk about APAR together because they're just two sides of the same coin.
Right.
But when you're talking to an end customer, thinking about building that product, you probably need to think, am I building AP or am I building AR first, right? And some of that goes to who do I service? If I'm a vertical SaaS company and I help my customers, again, to quote an invoice, then doing accounts receivable is where I want to start, right? I can help my customers collect money faster. Then I can help them reconcile faster. I can again give them portal, but then can turn it around and say, oh, hey, customer, did you know I can also do bill payment for you? Wouldn't that be nice? Or maybe I can connect these things. Like if you have, a billable item that you paid for and now you're charging your customer, like how can we make those things work better? And then you can start to say, oh, we can help your customers pay faster because we can offer them lending. Oh, now you want lending? Oh, I can do that too, right? And you just kind of add on. But I think you have to start with, again, what is the most core thing to your product that makes the most sense? And how do your customers behave, right? Maybe your customers buy everything by invoice. Okay, so then that's totally different than if maybe your customers actually buy a lot of stuff by card. So again, we'll pick on plumbers. Like a lot of plumbers are doing both and they need both things. And it's actually important to tie them together because they go to the plumbing supply warehouse and they order water heaters at high expense and they have credit terms and they pay an invoice. But then the plumber's out of the site and is like, oh crap, I need a thing. And they go to Home Depot and you want them to have a P card that does certain things, or they need fleet payments because they need to put gas in the trucks or whatever. And so you can start to see what is critical to your individual kind of use case and then build the services around that. But I think you have to start from which user are you servicing first? Are you servicing inbound or outbound money essentially? And then
Yeah.
build from there. Because if you try to bring the whole thing in all at once, even if that's like your long term strategy is you want to do both things, it can be very overwhelming.
Sure.
And So you have to sell people one thing, and maybe you turn it all on day one. Like maybe your platform lets you do that, but you don't go to sales and say, "Hey, we can do 10 things for you." Like anyone who's ever done sales knows that's not really a winning solution. You want to go to people and say, "I can fix a problem, and here's how I fix that problem." And then if they poke around and they are like, "Oh, and you fix other problems for me," you're like, "Okay, great, found money." But I think being very focused is really critical to building that early adoption and building that relationship where you build trust. If you've never done payments for a customer set before, you have to show them that you're not going to screw it up before they'll do a
Right.
lot of it with you.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And it feels like the software community and the investment community has really gotten on board with accounts receivable and really have thought a lot about that. And it seems like they're just kind of waking up to accounts payable. When do you think that kind of gains the full kind of adoption that we see, money in kind of taking today?
Yeah, accounts payable is really interesting because there's so many standalone tools for it, right?
Yeah.
Like your bank has it. You could be using again like Brex or Bill.com or Ramp or something. And so it comes to, I think, figuring out how you can tie these things better together on the back end and make things easier. And again, there's things like speed and clarity. As a business owner, and venture-backed fund firms are sometimes funny about this because they just have a bunch of money sitting around for a while. But most business owners, all they do is wake up and think about cash flow and think about it all day long, right? And
Right.
like timing is critical. You could be like, well, tomorrow I'm either going to be out of money or have a whole bunch of money, depending on who pays their bill and which bills I have to pay. And so, like, my favorite platforms are very, very clear about this is when the money's coming in, this is the speed of it, this is where it is if it's in transit. Like, one of my big complaints about Bill.com, I think we all know they're all sitting on the money for an extra day they don't have to. And like I think they're going to lose eventually if they keep doing that because that's an area of attack possibility. And so I think that there's this opportunity to create transparency in what has been a very opaque process that really will speak to the payable. Because if I can, so like this interesting, like Ramp has a bunch of new payables stuff they're doing. They moved beyond card and they do everything next day ACH instead of 3 day,
Okay.
which means that I can pay my bill on the same day I always paid it, but the money leaves my account several days later than it used to, right? If I use some other service. And again, as like a business owner, that's like extremely valuable, right? That's a couple extra days of cash.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really, let's be honest, next day ACH is not very expensive compared to 3 day ACH. It's like,
Right.
why is everyone doing 3 day? Because they just think they can get away with it, right?
Sure.
And so I think these things, and then you can start to build things together. So you say, oh, well, what if you have an embedded bank account with us? So QuickBooks does this. Like if you have QuickBooks checking and people pay you with QuickBooks, you'll get your money like the next day. If you have some other bank account, it can take like 5 days. It shouldn't really have to take 5 days, but it does because they're trying to push you onto their product and give you a
Right.
better experience. That is a reason to get a QuickBooks checking account.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Speaking to how to tie all of that together for sure. I guess for maybe a last question here, if you were one piece of advice, right, which I know is interesting considering how much advice that you could and do give, but if we've got a vertical SaaS leader sitting on the other end listening to this, and you could give them one piece of advice on how to launch successful payment offering, and I'll take either AR or AP or maybe even joint, but what advice would you give them?
I'll start with the product thing I always do, I guess, which is like, what is the most painful payments component your customers are doing?
Yeah.
And so if you can figure that out, then and you can solve a problem for your customer, they will love you for that. So if again, if you're small time plumbers, it's like better card acceptance, right? It's higher auth rates and faster payments. It's like all about the cards because they're just at someone's house, right? If you're a big B2B enterprise thing, then it's probably something totally different, right? Maybe it's financing of invoices or something like that. But I think that it's really about not just saying, oh, I'm going to implement payments. It's like, what is a problem I'm going to solve?
Yeah.
And how there is always a payments problem to solve. It's not going to be hard
Always.
to find one. But I think looking at it through that lens, rather than, as you said at the start, well, some VC told me I should probably do some payment stuff. Like
Yeah.
that is true. You probably should. But which one do you start with and how? And if you start with the right problem, then you'll be successful. The folks who are not successful start with the wrong problem. The other thing I would say is I can't give you one, so I'm giving you two, I guess.
I'll take it.
Is the experience part. I have
Yeah.
seen payments products fail because someone picked what they thought was like going to get them 10 basis points more. And to your point, like they just didn't get the volume
Yeah.
because they got distracted by some like overly clever payments construct and the experience was terrible. And so again, like you want payments to be seamless, like in that Uber example. And I am sure this isn't true, but let's say Uber had to pay 5 extra basis points all day long to make it seamless. Like they would absolutely do that because people only use it because it's great, not because of the payment. Like the extra five, even if Uber charges everyone 5 extra cents, no one notices.
Right, right. I think that's fantastic. And I love how you flipped a lot of this on its head, right? Experience and right to win over margin. And I think that's exactly right on. But I've definitely very much enjoyed our time today. And thank you so much for coming on the show and speaking with me. It's been great to have you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.